Every time there seems to be a little bit of a lull in the gaming world, everyone starts to wonder, what's the next big game gonna be? Well, that next big game is here, and it's Pokémon with guns. I mean, who didn't see this coming? It's outselling everything on Steam and breaking all the player records. PUBG, Cyberpunk, you name it, it's beating it. Also, it's actually kind of fun. What even is modern gaming? The game is called Palworld, and it launched on Steam in early access last Friday, and it's already blown past 5 million units sold. It's overtaken Cyberpunk 2077 as Steam's most played games. It's topped Steam's concurrent player count with 1.5 million active players, and it's only the 6th game ever to top 1 million concurrent players on Steam. To say that Palworld is doing well would be the understatement of the year. But is this game just a cheap Pokemon knockoff? Like, what's the deal here? Well, I think calling it Pokemon with guns is a bit of an undersell. Yes, Palworld is a very derivative game that is shamelessly borrowing elements from Pokemon, Zelda, Minecraft, Valheim, Fortnite, and more. But just like all of those games, it's also bringing something interesting and innovating along with it. In a nutshell, Palworld is a survival crafting game where you capture wild creatures called pals and make them do your busy work at your base to gather resources and craft items. Remember, they're pals, not, slaves or anything. They become both your labor force and your sidekicks in battle. Along with them, you'll use resources and items to fight against other pals, NPC humans, bosses, and other players that you might run into. Now, I'd say it leans more into the survival elements than, say, the crafting ones. You obviously have to keep your workforce busy with lots of tasks and items to make, but once you've set up your base, it kind of operates itself. However, the world isn't just available to you all at once. You have to start ranking up your character and base by doing specific quests. You and your party of pals also level up as you perform basic tasks like crafting, combat, gathering resources, etc. The more levels you unlock, the more base building blocks that you unlock, like workbenches, furnaces, farms, and more. And much like in Minecraft, the early game materials like wood and stone are easy to come by, and as you get more advanced building blocks, you'll need more advanced things like ores to build them. Now, when I first dove in and started scrolling through the skill tree, it seemed quite daunting just because of how much stuff there was. It felt like this game was going to be more of a grind than anything. However, I also at first didn't realize that your base of operations can be almost entirely automated, which helps out a ton. And once I realized this, I could just assign pals to my base to do basically everything for me, and suddenly it felt like I could just do whatever I wanted. And honestly, this is one of the innovations that makes Palworld feel like more than just a Minecraft or Pokemon clone. Most survival games do eventually evolve to some form of automated system, but it's usually like an endgame process or requires a lot of work to get there. Palworld lets you start automating right away, and honestly, it adds to the fun factor immediately. Now, as for how pals work, it's pretty basic. All the pals have different attributes and elemental types, very similar to Pokemon. So there's grass types that can do gardening, water types that can water those gardens, and fire types that can light campfires or run furnaces. And as you level up your base, you'll get additional pal slots that you can assign to it. So eventually you can have an entire plantation, base that's producing all these things for you. Now, the way you build out your base and lay out all the equipment is up to you. You build everything with prefabricated parts, so it's not quite as, say, intricate as you could get with, say, Minecraft, but I could still see players getting pretty creative with some of the structures you can make. I think the devs have struck a really nice balance between busy work, creativity, and automation that makes it feel almost like Stardew Valley in 3D with Pokemon and guns. Clearly, it's impossible to describe this game in a single sentence. Now, the world is sort of set in a Zelda-like sprawling environment with dozens of pals roaming around at any given area. And eventually, you can traverse the world with a network of fast travel points or even ride the pals around. But for the early parts of the game, you'll be running and gliding around. The farther you get from the starting area, the beefier the pals get, but also as you capture more pals and progress deeper into the game, new pals start spawning in the previously explored areas. You also find high-level boss pals in certain areas. Which leads me into the combat system. Combat is something that you as a character are mostly responsible for. You're not just throwing Pikachu out there and saying, "Pikachu, I choose you." You actually have to engage in the combat yourself. You can have 5 pals in your party, but you can only have one active as your sidekick at a time, and you can cycle through them at pretty much any time. But if they get knocked out, you have to revive them back at your base. Your character's attacks are all based on the weapons that you've crafted, so clubs, bows, and eventually guns. And when I say eventually, I do mean several hours into the game, but we'll circle back to that in a minute. Now, generally speaking, and that is with no endgame knowledge, it seems like you deal most of the damage in a fight and have to manage your pal's state between passive and or aggressively attack every hostile. And if you're trying to capture other pals, it can actually be a little bit tricky preventing your pal from knocking them out before you have a chance to throw a Pokeball, a pal sphere, to catch them. The lower that a pal's health gets, the easier it is to capture them, but if their HP hits 0, then they die and you can't get them anymore. And I do have to say, it does get pretty annoying when you accidentally kill a pal that you're trying to capture. I really wish there was a 4th attack state for your companion pals that prevented them from dealing a killing blow. It seems sort of like an obvious quality of life feature that's not yet in the game. Now, the starting area is pretty forgiving, aside from the first boss though, so you have plenty of opportunities to build out your party as long as you don't try to take on pals that are several levels higher than you. And most pals will remain docile unless attacked too, so you can get around the environment without having to worry about too many threats. Now, challenging high-level pals or bosses early on is pretty much guaranteed death, and depending on your difficulty options, they can either be a minor inconvenience or a dramatic loss if you're carrying, say, tons of valuable gear. Now, when it comes to the negatives of Palworld, it's hard to be super critical of the janky visuals, glitches, and bugs when the game has been in early access for less than a week, but it's very clear that Palworld needs a lot of polish. Pals often get stuck on invisible walls or stop doing your tasks and then stand in one spot until they pass out. Traversal seems to be a weird combination of Skyrim mountain climbing and Zelda's elegant stamina-based go-anywhere mechanics. You can scale most cliffs, swim, and glide, but all of those actions take up stamina. If you run out, you can fall and take damage or even drown. Attacking and sprinting also consumes this same stamina bar. So if you're exploring and forget to check your stamina bar before trying to cross a river or climb a cliff, there's a good chance that you could end up dead. That said, there's also a good chance that you can just kind of spam the jump key and make it up a hill or over obstacles regardless. There's also the usual jank of pals spawning underground, getting stuck in idle animations during combat, or blasting off into the skybox. Now, the bugs are pretty obvious and only slightly disruptive to the gameplay. Otherwise, Palworld is very playable and enjoyable for the most part. Overall, I gotta say I'm pleasantly surprised by Palworld. I went in expecting some sort of throwaway derivative early access game that blew up purely on novelty. But what I found was a surprisingly fresh take on a very well-tested genre. Sure, it's ripping off Pokémon unapologetically, but Pokémon has left themselves vulnerable by really just not innovating their world or mechanics in much of any way, where Palworld has created much more engaging and fun ideas. Hopefully the developers can keep pace with the insane growth that their game is experiencing and deliver the content that the players are looking for. What do you guys think? Have you played Palworld yet? Is it wild to see a Pokemon ripoff that's actually really fun and better than Pokemon in many ways? Let me know in the comments, and also leave me a like if you enjoyed this video, subscribe for more content like this, ding that notification bell to beat the YouTube algorithm with me, and next up, check out this dev series that I'm doing on a video game that I'm making with my friend Rich. It's a spaceship video game, and I think it's going to be badass. Check it out here. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. This is Level Cap, signing off.